Even though I'm making this book during, even though I'm creating this video during Hello and welcome to another video. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Erin and I'm so glad to have you visiting my channel today. In honor of Lesbian Visibility Week, I thought I would share a few books that I really love that either contain lesbian characters, romantic storylines between women, or just general lesbian representation. As a lesbian myself, I love reading stories about women who love women, and so I really had a hard time keeping this list of book recommendations to a reasonable length because I could truly just talk on and on and on about some of my favorite lesbian literature. Even though I'm making this video in honor of Lesbian Visibility Week, these books that I'll be recommending can be read and enjoyed any time of year. They are not solely meant to be read in just this 1 week of the year. Before I dive into the book recommendations for this video, I do want to have a statement of acknowledgement that sexuality and gender identity fall on a spectrum. While some of the characters that I will be discussing in the book recommendations may or may not have stated or claimed a particular label as it pertains to their sexual orientation or gender identity, I have selected books that, in my personal opinion, illustrate stories about women who love women. With all of that said, I believe that all identities and lived experiences are beautiful and valid. My hope with this video is to bring about more awareness and visibility to lesbian characters and their storylines and the women that they love. I hope you enjoy the books that I will be recommending today. Please remember to be kind and respectful in the comments section. And without further ado, let's just dive right into the video. The books that I'll be recommending are organized loosely by genre. Of course, most books will fall into more than one genre. So the categories that I've created are the way that I sort of see the books overall. And I will do my best to summarize these stories without giving away too many spoilers. Also, most of the books that I will be mentioning in this video, I either borrowed from my local library or on the Libby app. And if you're not familiar with the Libby app, it is a really cool app that connects with your local library card and you can borrow ebooks and audiobooks. I am not sponsored by Libby. It's just an app that I use regularly and I really love to share it with others. If you see me glancing down from the camera, I am referring to my notes because I, for some reason, have a really hard time remembering character names in books that I've only read once, and even if I really loved the book and it left a lasting impact on me, not having, read the book multiple times, the character names just don't stick in my long-term memory. They'll be there while I'm reading the book, but once I've moved on to another book, they kind of get muddled in my brain. The first genre category that I've created is titled Light-Hearted Romance, and the first book that I will be recommending is Forget-Me-Not by Allison Derrick. This story is set in present day and it is a coming-of-age story, and it follows the characters Stevie and Nora. They have been secretly dating for 2 years when the story begins, and unfortunately Stevie has an accident that causes her to lose her memory from the past 2 years. And therefore, she doesn't remember her relationship with Nora. This story is set in rural America, and these two young women are seniors in high school, and they are not out within their community. And so keeping their relationship a secret is important for their safety. And it's such a sweet story. It's very heart-wrenching at times because the story is told primarily from Stevie's point of view, but you do get a little bit of insight into Nora's perspective through letters that she writes to Stevie. And so it's just such a sweet story, and it's not a terribly long book. So it's a really quick read and really lighthearted. And it's one that I really, really loved reading last year because it did have a happy ending. I always enjoy reading queer love stories that have happy endings because so often the queer romance stories, there's often tragedy involved. And while this book did have a tragedy in a sense, it doesn't fixate on the tragedy for the entire book. Forget Me Not is a really, really good one, and one that I certainly won't forget myself. The other book in this category is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This I listened to as an audiobook, yes, and it is also set in present day, and this is a romantic comedy, and it has a little bit of light science fiction elements to it. If you are a hardcore science fiction fan, you may get a little upset by some of the science in this fiction. It's not totally sound, but it's not really the primary focus of the story. It's really meant to be about the two main characters. And this story follows August, who has recently moved to New York City to finish up her degree. And she just feels really lost in knowing who she is and what she wants to do with her life. She ends up meeting this woman, Jane, on the train. And she is this really cool kind of tomboy sort of, lesbian. And they just really click. And I can't really say much more about the plot without giving away some of the surprises in the book. It is one that I really, really enjoyed. It was really funny, and I really did love the other cast of characters in this story. August lives in a shared apartment with another couple and another guy, and she ends up working at this restaurant, or it's more like a diner. And I just loved all of the other characters in the story. I felt like they were fleshed out really well. The other characters were such good representation of people within the LGBTQIA+ community. I felt that they were very multidimensional, very colorful, probably some of them a little larger than life, but I think that it fit within the genre of this book being a romantic comedy. And I just felt really happy reading this book. Even though there were parts of it that I'm like, well, that science-y bit doesn't really make sense, or the science was a little inconsistent. Ultimately, I just was along for the ride and wanted to see how things turned out for the characters that I had really grown to love. So if you aren't too picky about some little sciencey bits not being quite so sound, and you enjoy a romantic comedy set in modern times, then One Last Stop is one that I definitely recommend. The next category that I have dubbed the speculative or fantasy fiction category. And the first book that I will be recommending is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. This one I stumbled upon in my library. It was just one of the books that the librarians had decided to feature, and the cover is what really drew me in. And I also really was intrigued by the title, and I was not expecting the story that I read. It surpassed any expectations that I had when I just read like the quick little synopsis on the cover. It is very much a genre blending, bending story, and it is just so cleverly crafted. I would really like to read more books by River Solomon in the future. And this story is set in present day, modern times, and it follows this young character named Vern. She is 15 years old at the start of the story, and she is escaping a strict religious compound that she has lived on for most of her life with her mother. And she flees to a nearby forest. And at the start of the story, we learn that Vern is pregnant, and she ends up giving birth to twins in the forest and ends up living in the forest for a time. Again, I don't want to give away too much because there's so many bits of, character development and plot twists within this story that, if I go into much more detail, I'm just essentially going to be telling you the whole story, which would spoil the twists and turns. This story does have some lesbian love story elements to it, and the fact that it is also blended in with this speculative element, I just really loved it, and I was so intrigued by what was going to happen next. I was just astounded by Vern's character. I suppose in a way this book could also be categorized as a coming of age story because we do see Vern grow and develop and change over the course of the story, and in more ways than one, which is all I'm going to say about that. And it's just one that has really stuck with me, and there's no way I could have predicted how the story was going to turn out. So it's one that I highly recommend for all sorts of reasons. And it's one that I think would also be really cool to read in like the spooky season because it has so many speculative elements, and there is sort of this mystery thriller sort of side to the story as well. So yeah, but really you can read it any time of year and I think you would enjoy it. The next book in this category I've spoken a little bit about previously, and that is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This one was one of my favorites for 2023, and this author is someone that I also hope to continue reading from. This story is set in present day, and it is told from two perspectives. We are following Miri and Leah, who are a married lesbian couple, and Leah, after returning from a deep sea mission that went totally wrong, is not the same as when she left. I like that this story was told from two perspectives because you get to see the experience that Miri goes through while Leah and her, deep sea mission crew are missing. And then you also get to see what was going on for Leah at the time. On like a surface level, this story is very slow moving and even mundane at times. Like there's, descriptions of how the dishes have piled up and Miri doesn't really know how to talk to Leah now that she's back, and she knows that something has changed and something happened, but she can't really get answers out of Leah. And then like there's even really mundane moments that Leah experiences at the bottom of the ocean in the submarine, and it's so interesting, the juxtaposition between these mundane moments and these really weird experiences that happen. And this book just really drew me in. I really was so invested to see the story to the end. And there's so much beautiful symbolism within this story, and it's one that got me choked up a little bit. I connected a lot with the characters, and I think as someone who is married to a woman, and I just think, I imagine like, what if something like this happened to us? Not that either of us are going to be going to the bottom of the ocean. But just imagining like a life-changing event like what Leah goes through and Miri goes through. I could really empathize with both of the characters, and I loved the speculative elements within the story as well. And yeah, it's one that I can't stop thinking about since I read it. The more that I think about it, the more I just really love the story and just think how brilliant it is. Our Wives Under the Sea is one that I highly recommend, especially if you like a little bit of a slower story, but one with so much depth. The next book in this category is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This one was a shorter story. It was technically a novel, but it was such a quick read. I think I read it in just a couple of days, and it was a real page turner. It is set in an alternate reality 1940s Chicago. Kind of think like the detective film noir sort of style. That was sort of the vibe that I got when reading this book, with some elements of fantasy. And this story follows Helen Brandt, who is a magical private detective, and she has been hired to track down the White City vampire. There are secret societies within this story. The love story between Helen and her partner Edith is really sweet and just loving. Edith also has some special qualities about her character. And this story was fast-paced, very immersive. There's lots of twists and turns, and I was just really amazed at how much the author was able to pack into such a short novel. And honestly, it left me wanting to know more. It's a good one, and it was one that completely surprised me. The title didn't give anything away. It's a really fast read, and one that I really enjoyed. Moving on to the next category, which is historical fiction. The first book that I will be recommending is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. And if you like lesbian literature, you have probably heard of Sarah Waters. This was the very first book by Sarah Waters that I read. And this story is set in 1862 in London primarily. It is a first-person narrative told from two characters' perspectives. You have the perspective of Sue and Maud. This book has so many surprises. There's just so many layers, and I think the choice to write this as a first-person narrative from two different characters' perspectives was really, really clever, because within the first part, you are hearing the story told by Sue. You really gain so much insight into her psyche, into her feelings, into her thoughts. Then in part two, the perspective suddenly switches at a really critical moment in the story, and then the story goes back a little bit and is told from Maud's perspective. And again, you get to understand her character's motivations and her thoughts and feelings. And because you already know up to that point that you just left off what has been happening to her from Sue's point of view, you now get to see Maud's point of view of all those same events. And then the story continues beyond that. It is so good. I read this book a few years ago, and it's fairly lengthy, but it is one that really makes you want to like turn the page and get to the next chapter and know what happens, because it's so well written. I really didn't see a lot of the plot twists coming that occur in this book. And I just love the setting for this story. Sarah Waters' descriptions of London in the 1860s is so gritty and raw. I just love it. It feels like I'm there. I can feel and smell and see and hear everything that she's describing. So check out Fingersmith, check out Sarah Waters. She is one of my favorite living authors. The next book is also by Sarah Waters. I do not own a copy of this book, unfortunately, but it is Tipping the Velvet, and this is set in England as well, and it is set in the 1890s, so a little bit closer to the turn of the century. This book is a coming-of-age story that follows Nan King, who was born and raised in Whitstable, and her family owns an oyster restaurant, and she is an oyster girl, and she, you know, dreams of having like, you know, a bigger life than just, you know, taking over the family business and living out her days in Whitstable. And she ends up meeting this young performer, Kitty Butler. Her act is her dressing up as a boy and singing and dancing to the audience. And Nan is just really taken with her and has this immediate crush on her, and ends up becoming friends with Kitty, and then eventually goes to London with Kitty to be her dresser for these larger performances that Kitty is going to be doing in London. And this story follows Nan from her life in Whitstable over several years living in London. And if I remember correctly, this story is told retrospectively. I think it might also be a first-person narrative. Nan is telling the story looking back over her life. It's so good. I like that Sarah Waters breaks up her longer stories into different parts, and this one, because it's a coming of age and also a coming out story, there was so much in this story that I really related to, and Nan's character really grows and changes so much over the course of the book, and she's so sweet and she's so resilient and just wants to be loved and wants to love and to not be rejected for who she is and for who she loves. And she definitely goes through some hardships, and there are some content warnings for this book. Also for Fingersmith as well. So if you're, you know, not wanting to read, you know, certain potentially triggering topics, look up some content warnings for Fingersmith and Tipping the Velvet, and Sorrowland as well. Yeah, Sorrowland, I would definitely put some content warnings for that story as well. Tipping the Velvet, it was one that it took me a while to read because I just connected so much with Nan's character that when this one particular thing happens to her, my heart just broke with hers, and I had to put the book down for a while and go read some other books that were a little more lighthearted, and then return to Tipping the Velvet and get through more of the harder bits. But I really do love the ending in this one as well. I do have to say that out of the books that I've read by Sarah Waters so far, she does put her characters through the ringer, but I feel like she gives them nice endings. I think so anyway. So yeah, Tipping the Velvet, another really good one by Sarah Waters. The next book is The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith. This is set in the 1950s and takes place mostly in New York, but there is also a portion of the story that takes place over a road trip across the United States. And this is a sapphic romance and was originally published under the pseudonym Claire Morgan in, I believe, 1952. This story follows Therese Belivet and Carol Aird. My wife Cynthia and I actually read this book together last year, and we did a deep dive of the book and the film adaptation Carol, which stars Rooney Mara and Cate Blanchett. We did an analysis of the book and the film over on our podcast, which is Two Lovely Lesbians. I will link that episode in the description box. This book is one that I really, really loved, and I had first seen the film and enjoyed the film, but I think the first viewing, because there was so much hype around it when it came out, I wasn't totally in love with the story after the first viewing, but then I read the book last year and really, really loved the story. And I loved how much more you get to know the characters. And there's, of course, more time that can be committed in a book versus a film when you're developing your characters. And after rewatching the film Carol last year, I had a greater appreciation for it because then I knew the source material and I could see how they decided to take certain elements of the book and translate it to film. And I just, I love both the book and the film now, but for different reasons. And I think that this book is one that is just amazing for the story, but also for the fact that it was published in the 50s and that there is this clear representation of a lesbian couple at a time when that was it was illegal in the United States. So the fact that this book even exists is really, really astounding. And it's one that I really, really love and one that I like to recommend to people because, you know, if you have seen the film Carol, not everyone knows that it's based upon a book. And if Patricia Highsmith sounds familiar, then you may be more familiar with The Talented Mr. Ripley, which was also written by her. She is a brilliant author and she has written so many different stories, and this is one that I think is truly one of her best. And the final book that I will be recommending in this video is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one was probably my top pick for the books that I read last year. And again, it's really hard to pick your favorite read out of an entire year of reading, but this one definitely made me cry the hardest. And if a book can make me cry really, really hard and make me feel so connected with the story and the characters, it's probably going to end up being a favorite for me. This one is a frame story, which means that there is a story and then a story within that story. And the frame story is set in the 2010s, and it follows Monique Grant, who is a magazine reporter, and she has been requested by the titular character Evelyn Hugo, who is an older Hollywood star, to give her final interview. The story then goes into Evelyn's story through these interviews, and it focuses primarily on Evelyn's life during the 1950s in Hollywood when she was an actress. And Again, without giving too much away, don't be fooled by the title and think, oh, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. How is this being recommended on a lesbian literature video? There are some lesbian love elements in here, and there's a lot of other beautiful queer love representation, and this book is just so like you have to read it. I just really appreciated the character development of Evelyn. Her characterization is so nuanced. She truly feels like a real person, but also a larger than life person. The more you learn about Evelyn's story, the more you really come to understand her and have empathy for her. And yeah, it's such a good one. And the other characters in the story in Evelyn's life are also really fleshed out, even though the story is focusing on Evelyn. I was absolutely enthralled by this story, and I recommend that everybody read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And those are all the books that I have time to share in this video. There are so many more that I could have mentioned and talked at length about, but I had to cut myself off at some point. And I would like to know in the comments if there are any books that you recommend. I love having more books recommended to me, so please feel free to share those in the comments. Before I wrap up this video, I would like to give a special thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for supporting my channel and also my creative work across the internet. Without your support, I wouldn't be able to make videos like this, so thank you so much for your support. If you're curious about my Patreon, I make bonus content and behind the scenes content, as well as an exclusive audio series that I write and produce myself. And I also host a book club. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed some of the books that I've recommended in this video. And until next time, I hope you have a lovely and cozy book to curl up with. Bye-bye.